Devil fruit users have always caught the eye of One Piece fans because of their powers and the unknown reality on how they came into existence. But something that isn't mentioned much throughout the show is if they're actually food, which is why we're gonna take that step into the food-based frontier. So for example, you're on a deserted island without anything to eat, but sitting in front of you is a giant pile of devil fruits. And of course, because of the rules set by One Piece, you would die if you tried to gain the power of more than one devil fruit. But let's say that they were already bitten and the powers were already passed on to someone else, leaving them without their effects, which is something that's already been seen through Ace's story and the smile fruits on Wano. And with that being said, with you being on that island, eventually you'll go hungry, and you've got one question. Could you actually survive by eating them? And not because of their powers, but because we're talking about devil fruits as a food. Do they have any calories? Would they actually fill you up? And could they give you enough nutrients for survival? Also, and probably most importantly, what would they even taste like? And there might even be more questions out there to think about this, but those are the ones we're gonna focus on today, which is why we're gonna start off our investigation trying to find out their real. And so when it comes to what an actual devil fruit tastes like, for those of you who have taken the time to see some of the show, or at least the parts where people are actually eating the fruits, will give you the insight of knowing that devil fruits taste terrible. But the question lies in their looks. They all look different, and with each one looking different, does that mean that each one of them are gonna taste different as well? Think of it like going to a grocery store and seeing all the different types of fruits, like apples, oranges, watermelons, mangoes. All of them look different, and they do taste different as well, with each one having their own sweetness, consistency, texture, and some even having more of a chewy or sticky texture, to even some having a light and airy feeling to them. So would that same logic apply to devil fruits? And well, even though that actually seems logical, it's actually never been stated in the One Piece universe of each devil fruit having their own flavor. But even though we don't know if each of the different fruits have their own distinct taste, we do know that they're gross, bitter, disgusting, and are so bad that they can make some people cry, which would be something to take into account before actually eating the fruit, because for sure, there's the possibility of filling up your stomach, but there'd also be the downside of you throwing up immediately after its consumption. And speaking of risk, if you're looking for something that does genuinely taste good, if you didn't notice already, there's actually a pile of smile fruits behind the actual devil fruits that are on the island. And the smile fruits actually do have a decent taste, stated to be sweet, and have a flavor that's much more similar to regular fruits, giving you a much more appealing option. But wait, think again, because they have a far worse downside than a bad flavor. Eating one of these will make you lose your ability to express any emotion except smiling and, of course, laughter, which is the reason the fruit got its name in the first place. Yep, they give you a much better flavor, but with a far worse downside, unless you're a psycho who likes nothing better to do than uncontrollably laugh. And so with knowing the flavor of the fruits, it gives you something to think about, but will they actually fill you up? Do devil fruits really have any? A calorie is a measurement of energy. Calories are measured in food and drinks for the amount of energy they provide your body to be able to sustain itself. Calories are measured in any type of macro like fats, proteins, and carbs. And so this logic would apply to devil fruits by them having their own calories. But there are no nutrition facts on devil fruits. There's no label saying that each one of them has calories, protein, carbs, fats, nothing. So we have to make an assumption. Let's assume devil fruits are like a biological fruit. In other words, they contain some combination of nourishment, because if they were literally at zero nutritional value, then the answer would be incredibly easy. You couldn't survive. You'd basically be eating magical rocks. But if we're going to say that devil fruits are actually edible biological matter, then they should provide at least some sort of energy. And that's where we can start comparing them to a normal food, which my best choice for that would be the dragon fruit. Mostly because of its coolness factor. But just look at it, even its name gives mythical vibes, which is why I'll use the nutritional facts for a dragon fruit on our devil fruit scenario. And so if we're talking about an entire dragon fruit, we're looking at roughly 200 to 300 grams of edible fruit, depending on its size of course. That gives us around 120 to 180 calories per whole fruit, most of those calories coming from carbohydrates. But you'd also get around 5 to 10 grams of fiber, which would be pretty good for digestion and could help you feel full. And as well as that, dragon fruits are also a good source of vitamin C, magnesium, and antioxidants, along with a lot of water inside it. But they have a nutritional weakness, especially if you're stuck on an island. And that weakness is its lack of protein and fat, with a whole dragon fruit only giving you about a few grams of protein and very little fat per fruit. So, if devil fruits were the only thing you ate, with having the same nutrition as dragon fruits, you'd get some calories out of it, hydration of course, fiber, and micronutrients. But you'd definitely not be getting enough protein, fat, or calories to live on long term. And when we're talking about long term, of course, we'd be able to live by eating dragon fruits. But the question is, and so here's where I think the answer gets a little bit more interesting. Could you survive forever on devil fruits? Probably not. At least, not if we're assuming they're nutritionally similar to a dragon fruit. But could you survive for a while? Absolutely. If a devil fruit were to contain enough carbs, fats, and nutrients, you could potentially get enough calories to keep your body running. And if there are hundreds of devil fruits available on the island, you'd have a much better chance of getting a variety of nutrients than if you were just to eat one. Of course, just as long as you can stomach it. And if you're able to have as many dragon fruits as possible on that island, your length of survival would just depend on how long it'll take your body to break itself down from a lack of complete diet, which would leave you with a survival estimate of... So could you live entirely off devil fruits? Well, yes and no. You could survive, but not for long, especially because you might give on the taste first. So at that point, the question would be, would you survive those few months with little chance of being saved off of entirely devil fruits, which of course taste really bad, and you wouldn't be getting the same nutrients as you would with meat or any other type of foods? Or would you risk it all and just say, hey, I'd rather just smile and enjoy the food that I have here and go for one of those smile fruits? Of course, you'd be laughing nonstop, but you'd be enjoying your last days, or at least the flavor of it.